Good evening, everyone. It's my privilege to welcome you all to the International Workshop on Interdisciplinary Approach to Climate Change Education, organized by the Indodex Research Center on Climate Change Law, Research and Education in collaboration with the Government Law College, Ernakulam and the Leiden University. Everyone, it's my privilege to welcome you all to the International Workshop. Interdisciplinary collaboration is crucial in tackling climate change, and Netherlands stands as a global leader in this approach. From pioneering climate resilient urban planning to integrating law, science, and economics in policy making, the country has shown how cross disciplinary efforts can create effective and lasting climate solutions. The IPCC's sixth assessment report highlights that integrating scientific, legal, and governance framework is key to achieving climate adaptation and mitigation goals, making today's discussion especially relevant. Our panel discussion today, the Netherlands Encouraging Interdisciplinary Understanding of Climate, will explore how diverse fields can work together to create sustainable policies. To lead this conversation, I am honored to introduce our moderator and beloved Professor Joby Bhaskar, Professor of Law at Government Law College, Ernakulam. Her expertise in legal research and policy making makes her an integral part of today's conversation. With that, I warmly welcome you all and invite Professor Joby Bhaskar to take over the session. Over to you, ma'am.
The topic of today's session is the Netherlands encouraging interdisciplinary understanding of climate. The Netherlands is renowned for its proactive approach to addressing climate change. The Netherlands supports interdisciplinary research initiatives that brings together experts from diverse fields such as environmental science, economics, sociology, engineering, law, from all fields. Institutions like Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Science and Netherlands Organization for Scientific Research fund projects that integrate insights from multiple disciplines to tackle complex climate challenges. 2023 report of NO identified knowledge gaps and developed a research agenda to address the health impacts of climate change. The report calls for transformative changes to the energy, transportation, manufacturing, and agriculture sectors. Another initiative is with respect to education institutions in Netherlands incorporate climate education into their curricula, ensuring that students develop a comprehensive understanding of climate issues from an early stage. This includes integrating climate science into school programs and offering specialized courses at universities that focus on climate change impacts and mitigation strategies. The Dutch government has established robust policy frameworks that encourage collaboration across sectors to address climate change. For example, the Climate Act sets ambitious targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and requires an integrated approach involving government agencies, businesses, and civil society. The Netherlands is a hub for climate-related innovations with a focus on developing sustainable technologies and solutions. This include advancement in renewable energy, water management, and sustainable agriculture, all of which require interdisciplinary collaboration to develop and implement effectively. Besides their own dynamic activities, the Netherlands actively participates in international climate agreements and initiatives such as Paris agreements and collaborates with other countries to share knowledge and best practice in addressing global climate challenges. India is also get such an opportunity. This international cooperation fosters a broader understanding of climate issues beyond national borders. To delve into more depth of the topic, we have experts from leading universities who will sure to enlighten us. We welcome Dr. Adrian Bedner, Dr. Rhea Roy Mammen, my student, Dr. Lisa Harms, Dr. Jyoti Trivikraman. To you all, I first call upon Dr. Adrian Bedner to enlighten us.
Thank you very much for this gracious introduction. It makes me feel a bit humble as the picture you paint of the Netherlands, I think, is far more positive than the picture I have about it, particularly with the current government, which tries to basically reduce all the measures that have been introduced so far when it comes to climate change. However, there are some positive developments as well. So we need to keep our faith. And what I would like to focus on now is like setting a bit more general introduction about the difficulty of integrating interdisciplinary perspectives in the study of law. So I will not be speaking specifically about climate change and about sustainability, but more generally try to show an overview how this works, how it's worked out in the Netherlands and Indonesia. I have a few slides which I will share with you. And this is the first one. And it shows you the development of social-legal studies in the Netherlands, which started really a long time ago in 1910, when Henri Heijmans, who was a professor of private law, actually called for taking into account society's norms as law, called the law of reality, het recht der werkelijkheid. That was his inaugural lecture. The point was that at that time, the study of law in the Netherlands was really dogmatic in nature, that also the Supreme Court was very dogmatic in its, formalistic in its approach of law, and that the conditions in practice had become very much removed from the kind of justice that the Supreme Court and legal scholars provided. And this was what Henri Heijmans actually spoke out against. And that was the start of a development which in 1935 led to the appointment of the first professor of sociology of law in the Netherlands, and that was Hugo Sinsheimer, who was a Jew who had fled from Germany from the Nazi regime, and he was also a professor of labor law. And this is interesting to see, because labor is one of the fields where we see that indeed the points of departure of the system of private law, for instance, freedom of contract, which assumes that the parties bargaining about a contract have the same power. In labor law, that is clearly not the case. So the points of departure of private law and contract freedom had become very much removed from the situation as it was in practice. So it's not surprising actually that it was in labor law that that many of the first legal sociologists had their training first. This led to a period in the Netherlands where actually these ideas became relatively accepted. But they got a new impulse during the 1970s when, stimulated by social movements in the Netherlands, by the 1960s protests against the political order at the time, resulted in renewed attention for the inequalities and the need to train lawyers in other methods. And that worked for a while, and then we again, it's like an ebb and flow. It goes up and down, and it went down again in the 1990s, which is when I started my studies. And this was under the influence of neoliberalism, which was very technocratic, very much aimed at lawyers being able to capture the basics of dogmatic and formalistic legal reasoning, and not so much interest in bringing in other perspectives on justice. What is justice, and how do you try to pursue justice within the framework of the studies of dogmatic law? However, now we are facing all these new problems. We now know what neoliberalism did to the housing market in the Netherlands. We know what it did in all kinds of other fields. Basically, yeah, and undoing many of the government efforts to provide social security and to provide basic needs of citizens. And again, like at the other times, we see that there is renewed attention. And one of the very, very important topics which plays a role here is indeed climate change, which is a big concern in the Netherlands. Most Dutch acknowledge that climate change is one of the biggest threats at present. Although they don't vote as if they're aware of this, but it is generally acknowledged. And law students also seem to acknowledge this, and law lecturers, that there is this need for interdisciplinarity. So presently there is an urge for more interdisciplinarity in the legal education. And part of it is stimulated by the ideas about sustainability and climate change. To give an example, the Faculty of Law in Leiden University is now integrating interdisciplinary perspectives in all subjects taught. Now, this is a massive process. It's really hard to actually do this, because you need to have lecturers who are able to manage. It's a process which is ongoing. It's now being introduced in the curricula, and we still have to see how it works out. And having said that, I think it's a very positive development. On the other hand, when we look at the Leiden curriculum, we see that there's, for instance, there's no longer any specialist on environmental law, let alone on climate change law. So it will be hard to actually bring on board the necessary expertise. Very briefly about Indonesia. Indonesia, when it was a Dutch colony, was actually, it was cursed by being a colony, but it was blessed by having a professor like Cornelis van Vollenhoven, who actually championed the validity of the local Indonesian law, and who resisted imposing Western law on these communities, which was particularly important when it came to rights to land. And his attempt by mounting local law, customary law, as the law of the land, he tried to prevent the overtaking of huge tracts of land for plantations. And he only succeeded to an extent in that, but he certainly he had a lot of influence. And his attitude to law was really like, you have to find the law at the local level. You really have to look at the law as it is being enacted in daily life. So he took a very anthropological view, actually, of how you had to look into local law. And when Indonesia became independent, one would expect that this would actually continue, but under several authoritarian governments, this actually, the need for or the urge for a dogmatic approach to law became increasingly pervasive. And only in the 1970s, we saw Mohtar Kusuma-Atmaja, who, under the influence of legal realism in the United States, where he had studied, he was a minister of justice. He was a prominent lecturer. He tried to introduce some of the more liberated views, the more sociological perspectives about justice into the study of law. However, he did not succeed, to the extent that the study of law in Indonesia became incredibly dogmatic, very formalist in its approach, and that anything which basically goes outside of grammatical interpretation of the law is labeled as non-law. So they're speaking of the pure law, going back to Hans Kelsen, and anything that is non-normative and not based on legislation. Hello, that is outside the law. And obviously, as we see in the Netherlands, this has resulted in a counter movement. So we now have an association of social legal studies in Indonesia, which is led by Faghizal Afandi, who did his PhD here in Leiden. And we had a project called Innovatie Pendidik, so Innovation of Legal Education in Indonesia. A project in which we try to actually show how interdisciplinary insights can be of use also to dogmatic or doctrinal law interpretation. And this is an ongoing effort, and this is one in which I'm very much involved myself. And we see in Indonesia, which where there is a battle between old-fashioned capitalist rapid development in the form of big conglomerates getting subsidies from the government and large tracts of land to develop plantations. On the one hand, and on the other hand, we see people resisting this, and these are a lot of law faculties are involved in this. On the other hand, the government is also aware of climate change and taking half-heartedly certain measures. What we try to do is also to make lawyers aware of the possibilities they have to play a role in this and to stimulate this. Now, there's one thing I want to say generally, which I think is something we might look at in our discussion later on, which is that generally law students don't like interdisciplinary perspectives, because what they would like is there is a case, there are a number of rules, you bring the case under the rules, and this is the outcome. So thinking about what justice is, about what fairness is, makes it more complex. And to me, it makes it more interesting. But we need to clarify to our students that actually it is more interesting, because they are generally more looking at sometimes like mathematics. And this is certainly the case in Indonesia. We see that very, very much so. And we try to, it's a challenge to actually develop that, and certainly bringing in sustainability perspectives and interdisciplinary perspectives. What we do to stimulate this is to explain to lawyers that if they can't speak to other disciplines, their task will just be taken over by AI. It does make sense. I mean, if you're just doing arithmetics instead of law, you're actually you can be replaced very easily. So it's precisely this is interdisciplinarity which opens avenues for them, and also in their professional lives. Okay, I've spoken for too long already, but thank you for listening, and these were my 2 cents to contribute to this session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Dr. Rhea Mammen to express her ideas.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm indeed privileged to speak in this particular context about interdisciplinary approach, and taking from where Adrian left it to say if our law students are really open to this concept, because there's something, or the transition that we saw in the Indian legal education was also to bring in the idea of interdisciplinary, where they figured law cannot stand in silos. Law needs to understand other discipline for it to have its actual effect and reflection. So for a very long time, legal education and practice was being structured around the distinctive areas as constitutional law, corporate law, criminal law. But unfortunately, when we talk about climate change law, it cannot be fit into one particular regime. And for a very long time, it's been understood as part of environment law, but by now we would have all figured that it does not really become part of environment law. Rather, it's also a part of all of these parts. Now, when we look at climate change and to understand the legal principles, we see that there is a threshold, or there is a ceiling when we come to interpreting these laws, because a lot of this includes a lot of scientific terminology. The impact has a lot of sociological understanding and anthropological understanding. And especially as lawyers, we tend to negate those factors and try to come out with an argument which does not have a substantial holding. And it is at this point that the entire discussion about interdisciplinary understanding of climate change comes into picture. So what do we mean understand by the interdisciplinary approach or trying to raise a climate conscious lawyer? The idea here is not to replace law. We need to get that also very clear. The idea here is that it's also not to make sure all law students, lawyers understand in its full depth the scientific, economic, political, all the background. That's also humanly impossible. But what we're trying to raise out here is to have a wider perspective and raise a mindset of having an open set to at least collaborate, at least work along with these expertise and have an to an extent, as far as possible, a peripheral understanding of how it works. So when we talk about this, this is to understand in terms of to say, how does science work in here? How does the idea of what do you mean by carbon emission or environmental degradation or planetary boundaries? Because you need to have a scientific understanding. What does these terminologies mean? So if you're looking at, say, we're so familiar with the term of climate finance, we're familiar with the term of green finance, we're familiar with the term of carbon taxing, carbon pricing. But in order to really understand what it means in its legal implication is also to understand these concepts. This similarly goes for the idea of social justice, human rights, understanding the concept of social justice in terms of climate justice. In this line, to understand this becomes very important to see that law is read along with this understanding and how best the curriculum can integrate or have a mixed approach. So what we're trying to do here is to look out for practices or spaces that can integrate these kind of approaches. So what I would try to see is when you're going to ask for a drastic change, no one's going to be open for it. So we're going to just look at some of these examples where we could utilize what's already existing in the system and taking India as an example. One of the core part where the Indian law colleges work is the fundamental 5-year course that we have or the 3-year program, which has its foundation on interdisciplinary approach. So when we have the non-legal papers introduced, it would I understand that so many of the colleges are moving forward in this regard, but also to showcase to the law students about the importance it has in law that the introduction of these legal papers comes from the beginning and at the time of introduction of these non-legal papers as well. The second way that we can accommodate this is to look at a collaborative teaching method. Now, let's say we are all restricted to the time frame. Now, it's impossible to take up all the scientific knowledge and translate to the lawyers. I mean, then so scientists would be out of job. So then it's just lawyers in the field. But in order to work along, is to look at ways in which identifying specific modules and specific number of hours in the stretched out period to look at ways of engaging with these collaborative way, which is pre-scheduled and pre-identified. Yet another way we could probably look at and somewhere we could see is how just like every university worldwide, Indian universities are also prominent or in forefront about accreditation ranking. And one of the major criteria that they look at is about maintaining a green campus. So in fact, you have a lot of these terminologies used in terms of ensuring a campus is green. So of course, you have funny memes regarding it, but utilizing this into a curriculum is a mechanism in which we could encourage these interdisciplinary discussions. Moving forward, one of the examples as we were discussing during a team was also to see how best can faculty also collaborate with non-law faculty members to come out with a research paper that contributes in this regard. So accepting that we, of course, may not hold that expertise, our ability or mindset to open up and work along with other disciplines, and one of the classic ways would be to come out with a paper in this regard. Now, keeping all of this in mind, also looking at multiple ways, I want to re-emphasize the fact that unless all of this does not translate to a legal regime or law, all of the understanding of science, economics, politics becomes futile also. So it's important that we understand the importance of working together and ensuring that our students are also exposed to these ideas so that we ultimately, I believe, can come out to the concept of climate conscious lawyering. With this foundation, I would like to open, of course, the floor to my other panel members who could share much more insights into how best we can get them as a practice into legal education institutions. Thank you.
Rhea, for telling us that it is very important to identify some hours to have some interdisciplinary classes along with law. Now over to Dr. Jyoti Trivikrama. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. A disclaimer, I am not a lawyer. I don't teach in the law school, so I teach at another faculty at Leiden, the Faculty of Governance and Global Affairs. So I'm going to bring that perspective into this conversation because we have many a variety of disciplines related to public administration, security studies, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to speak specifically about a project that my colleague Min Cho and I are working on, and I'm going to share some slides if I can navigate that. Can you see them? Is it all good? Okay, so Min and I have this project that was awarded by the Dutch funding agency, NRO, and we've titled it EcoConnect, because part of what we've realized is that, myself included, we were not trained in climate change sustainability issues. And so it is a challenge when we're asked now to integrate this. We have learning outcomes, we have limited time. We all know that we're struggling to kind of balance teaching and research and service to the university. And so how do we do this? So our goal is to kind of equip educators with the tools and resources to integrate climate change into their teaching. And we are approaching this from 3 angles, which is we need them to understand the carbon cycle, greenhouse gas effect, biodiversity. We want them to feel comfortable entering the space, so they need to get skills, as well as this idea of fairness and justice is central to thinking about sustainability and climate change, because it's not just about climate change, but it's about climate justice, which is, I think, a broader concept when we're thinking about climate change. And so, so we've approached this from this idea of addressing the emotions and skills for coping with the planetary crisis, trying to come up with tools to support educators who are feeling lost on how to start teaching these topics, and to also integrate student well-being. And so into that, I'm going to skip this slide for time reasons. We received the grant last May, and we spent from May until December gathering data. So we conducted focus groups with students. We had a staff and student survey, which we are happy to share with colleagues who are interested in this. And I really recommend having these conversations with colleagues around how they feel about integrating climate change. What do students think about these issues? So we did surveys, interviews, and focus group discussions that are easily adaptable for your local context. And so just reach out if you're interested in these materials. We developed this opportunity tree that we used in the focus groups. And this opportunity tree has our desired outcome, which is living well in a climate just world. And we want a world where students and future generations live sustainably and equitably, equipped to address climate challenges and contribute to justice-focused solutions, right? If that's our goal, what do we as educators need to do? And that's the roots, right? So if we start at the roots, then we have our trunk, which is what are the skills needed by students to achieve this desired outcome. So we use this in our focus group, which proved really helpful. for students to kind of get a frame on like what do they need from their classes and what are the skills needed if that's what they are aiming to achieve. And again, I can share these slides, so I'm just going to go quickly over this. But what students felt that they really needed was obviously foundational knowledge and critical thinking around this idea of interdisciplinarity that we've spoken about, real-world applications. They also needed emotional and social support. I mean, the idea of climate anxiety is real. Many students in our focus group spoke about feeling numb, feeling overwhelmed, feeling scared about what this might mean for their future. And I think we as educators need to realize that the emotions don't stop when they enter the classroom door. They enter, they are there and present in how they engage with the work, how they absorb it, how they relate to each other, and what they think about what they want to study, right? So I think it's important to kind of think about the student as a whole person and integrate this, but that also requires us being trained and comfortable in this space also, right? It is a lot of new thinking for educators to kind of address emotions, and this isn't to mean that we're advocating for them to be counselors, but to address the whole student, right? Which is a somewhat different than many of us were potentially trained to do. And these are the skills that students would like to get from their education. Empathy, open-mindedness, practical knowledge, application, engagement, and how to communicate about these topics to other colleagues and outside of the university setting. And then in our academic staff interviews, as many of you know, many academic staff are experiencing overwork and just are kind of tired from all the other responsibilities, right? So they are looking, they want to do this, but thinking about how to integrate climate change into their education is difficult. They have learning outcomes for their discipline. They also have other competing needs and short time frame assignments, readings. How do they integrate this in a way that does accuracy and justice to the topic and isn't superficial, right? And I think that that's what we need to try and focus on and balance is you want to integrate this, but do it in a way that's meaningful. And then I'm going to share with you some of our surveys results, but this is focused primarily on students. So you can get a sense of what I mean by when I say students are experiencing climate anxiety. Students are very, very worried, obviously, right? Extremely worried, very worried about climate change threatening people and the planet. Climate anxiety is really large, right? They fear for the future. They're uncertain about what's going to happen. And they are very cognizant of the fact that their lives will be directly impacted by these issues that we are discussing now. So what we are planning is actually a workshop in July for Leiden University staff this year. And then next year, we hope to launch this throughout the country, a book publication in Dutch and in English to focus on teaching materials, practical tips, resources, so that educators in different disciplines can get a sense of this might work, this is a strategy for me to try, and a website where we can build a community to share resources, but also to know that we're not alone in these issues and to try and bounce ideas off of each other. I'm going to give you, skip this. I'm going to give you the quick visual. We're going to have an online and an offline component. And the online component are knowledge clips made by one of our colleagues that will not focus on climate change, but large issues to think about, such as complexity, mutualism, because there's enough data on climate change, but other topics that are really important if you want to enter the space around climate change. And then we're going to do a series of 2-day workshops, one workshop on syllabus design. How do I actually integrate climate change into my course? What are some tips and tricks? What are some ways that we have done it in our courses, and to have a faculty actually make design changes to their syllabus? And then we're going to have another workshop on how you think about emotions in climate change and how you might want to integrate this. This will focus on active hope. So how can you be hopeful, but also be an active citizen? And we're working with some other colleagues at Leiden to develop this module. And that will also all be on our website that we can share with you once it's launched. As another project that Min and I are working on is, I'm going to share this very briefly, is on waste and building a waste network and how you can link education and practice. Our entry point for this is food waste, because and food waste and food insecurity are growing issues here in the Netherlands. And so we are hoping to build a network to kind of improve waste studies education, but link it to challenge-based education in the Netherlands. So these are some of the projects that we are working on. And if Min wants to add anything to follow up, because I've spoken enough. Thank you. Do you want to add anything, Min?
No, that was great. And just let us know if you have any questions, or if you'd like to also try out the survey yourself to engage with your students. We're also looking for collaborators to try this model out beyond Netherlands. So we're happy to collaborate with partners abroad also. So thank you for this opportunity.
You, Jyoti and Mincho. Now over to Lisa.
Hi,
Welcome.
everyone. Thanks for the invitation. And I think it's actually quite nice. I think our interventions follow quite organically. So from Adrian, who gave us a large picture, we moved to institutions and how to design modules on sustainability. And I will actually try to zoom a little bit more in on the classroom itself, because I will speak of teaching experience that I have as a sociologist at a law faculty. Where I'm actually teaching a class on making human rights work. So it's not directly concerned with sustainability, but the focus is on giving the students an understanding of how human rights can be achieved in practice. So how it deals with issues of access to justice, of larger ideas of how to frame what human rights framings actually entail, what type of consequences they lead to, etc. And sustainability issues come a little bit into the picture at the end of this class when I talk with the students about rights-based approaches to climate change and the question of what rights frameworks can actually achieve in practice when we look at specific case studies. So that's the kind of setting in which I gather my experience. And so, as I said, I'm a sociologist, but the students I'm teaching are for the vast majority law students, and also legal practitioners. So some of them had 10 years of practical experiences in legal professions. And so from the outset, that's a challenge because we all come from very different horizons. And I will just share with you briefly some of my general experience, some of the challenges that I see in this classroom, and maybe 2-3 ideas on how I try to address those challenges. So very generally speaking, it is an extremely positive experience, and you see when you enter these when you confront the students with the interdisciplinary debates, you see how it deeply resonates with them, especially with practitioners. And I think the reason for that is that this type of class gives them a vocabulary for something they already know, but could not actively put into words. And many of them tell me afterwards that actually finally they can say things as they have already felt about. So I think that's actually the primary that's actually one of the main achievements of this class. But it is also a very unsettling experience because we also approach law and something they believe deeply in, because they take it for granted. We approach this from a critical angle. And so we challenge the assumption that human rights are per se, per definition, good, but that there are problems involved. And so that's an unsettling exercise, but not something that the students are not able to manage. And so more specifically on the challenges that I observe, I think I can mention two that are sort of part of the same coin. The first challenge is, and it's a challenge for the students, but also a challenge for myself, is to be able to unthink the paradigm within which they have been thinking from day one in their life as a student. And I think Adrian mentioned that they come to the law faculty and they learn how to think systematically about law. And they feel incredibly comfortable in this way of thinking. They know that B follows on A and how to construct the reasoning. And then in the class I'm teaching, they are supposed to entirely leave behind the legal thinking and enter an entirely new universe of theories, etc. So that's an extremely challenging task, both methodologically and substantively in terms of topic. How do they formulate questions from a different disciplinary disciplines? So that's very difficult. The second is, I should add that this is also a challenge for myself, because I have been entering the sociological world, but not from day one of my life as a student, but I'm very much in there and I take it for granted. So it takes a time to understand the other. Where do my students actually come from? What are their expectations? What are their modes of thinking? And it took me some time to understand that, well, I cannot just take for granted all the vocabulary I have been trained in. So it's a mutual experience of translation. So that is the second challenge. It's about, well, on the unthinking follows the rethinking. So how to give them the tools of rethinking without having the time and the capacity to entirely immerse them into a new discipline. So I have to necessarily abstract from grand theories because simply I don't have the time to get it to them, and it will not be entirely useful. So, but it's also again a challenge for myself, because I also need to be prepared to confront the legal knowledge. So each time I'm a little bit nervous, because I know that I stand a little bit on shaky grounds, and that potentially my students know the law better than I. And that's not an easy task to confront either. And I need to actually train myself legally quite a bit to do that. So just one maybe third challenge that I see specifically on applying rights or this type of practical rights reasoning or sociological rights reasoning to climate change. There, I always observe the challenge that since this is a new development, applying rights, human rights approaches to sustainability, we quickly slip away from our critical approach, and students are all enthusiasts. This will be the solution. This is beautiful. And so here I always need to catch them again and to remind them of the starting point, the theoretical ambitions, etc. So that's actually a challenge I observed in that respect. So maybe just now a few words on how I try to address those challenges, or some approaches. So the first, and I think it's the most important one, but I realized it only this year very actively, is expectation management. So I now incorporate in my class a first session where I really try to ask the students, and they should come prepared on what is it actually that you expect when you hear the title of my class, Making Human Rights Work. And there are two expectations, basically. One is that we have a ready-made list of to-dos, and this is the practical, that will be the solution to our problems. And the second is that they expect that I will teach them tools about strategic litigation. So, and both expectations are entirely unmet, obviously, in my class. So, but it helps me to realize that if I know that, I can prevent disappointment, and also sort of channel from the start the expectations of the students in the right direction, and prepare them that they have to confront some more theoretical thinking tools, etc., in order to navigate through the class. So, but it's also, again, for me, very important to know what their expectations are, and to adjust my own expectations to them. So what is it actually that I can legitimately and practically expect from this classroom? It's actually quite important, I think. So not to be besides the point and not to overdo it in the end. The second broader kind of importance, but it's maybe something that is actually, it's relevant in general in teaching, obviously, but I think specifically in interdisciplinary efforts, is to build trust. So the students really need to trust the teacher and vice versa when they enter this insecure, actually a very insecure space. As I said, they don't know how to reason not legally. So they need to trust me to be able to engage actually in the class, to feel comfortable to test the vocabulary they learn freshly, and they need to trust that nobody laughs when it actually sounds a little bit superficial, because it's simply not yet ready to go into the depth of the issues. So I think that's an important aspect to keep in mind. And the third I wanted to mention is that, so instead of, so as a sociologist, I always want them to understand at a broader theoretical basis what they are dealing with. I want to understand them to understand everything about the sociology of organizations and identity formation, etc. But that's impossible. They are entirely lost if I start talking too theoretically. So what I try to do is really to start with extremely concrete case studies, and try to get them on a track where they organically arrive at a more abstract level of thinking, and therefore develop tools that they can then apply to another case. So, for example, it's something, maybe just to make this a little bit more concrete, we talk about impacts of courts, international courts, which in the human rights area, but it also applies to environmental issues, of course. And we confront different studies that study effects from different empirical angles and different conceptual angles. And since this is, they know well these cases, etc., but they will see very different types of impacts that are studied. And organically from there, we move to different ways of thinking of impact. We move to what does it actually mean for community building, for social movements. So we introduce those notions on the basis of a case, and actually they get there by themselves. So that's one important strategy here. And the second is that I always try to bring in their real life experiences. So start with themselves and their very intuitive approaches, and integrate that to a maximum, because it really helps them understanding things in a very short time frame. I think I wanted to mention something that I forgot earlier. It's probably it's relevant actually for the challenges. So I put this as a retrospective remark, but it's important, I think. So one of the biggest challenges is it goes in the unthinking, is that law students are very happy when, or need, or have really this inbuilt need almost to come up with a normative prescriptive conclusion. And in contrast, as a sociologist, I feel incredibly comfortable that I don't have to do that. I feel so relieved that I don't have to say what is normatively and prescriptively necessary after my analysis. And it took me also some time to understand that I'm not, that I don't expect them and I don't want them to be prescriptive and normative, but they feel actually very unsatisfied because they feel they haven't come to a conclusion at all. So that's something that I also try to address from the start. It's something that, yeah, basically learning probably also from my own mistakes, and try to prevent them when I manage expectations, etc., and try to direct my feedback for them, especially in that direction. So on that note, thanks for listening, and yeah, looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Asma. Actually, I remember the days when we studied law. Sociology was one of our subject in Government Law College, and we studied sociology. And actually, that was very important for us to study sociology as a paper, because we are dealing with the people. And as you have rightly stated, that for the community building and social movement, all those things, we should, law students should study sociology. And we hear your concern about unthinking, rethinking. It's quite difficult. We understand that it's quite difficult to teach lawyers, especially who is having 10 years practice. They always question everything, and it is very difficult for them to unthink, and it's difficult to rethink. We got it, but it is very necessary. So it's open for discussion right now. We can have a discussion, because each resource person has given their own views. So I think we will have a discussion about it. Any questions?
I have one question I'd be interested to hear about. My experience in interdisciplinary teaching is really with social sciences and law in particular. And what we see also is that what we are now trying to do also in developing some initiatives in the field of sustainability and climate change is to get on board the hard sciences, so to say, or including ecology, biology. And I wonder whether, particularly, I'm interested whether Jyoti and Min have any experience with trying to bring that on board in your project.
Go ahead, Min. Oh, you look like you were going to say something.
Yeah, so I come from, I wouldn't say hard sciences, but I do come from public health and medical background. And the courses that I teach are One Health, which deals with both the human health, like the infectious disease aspect, with the environmental health, as well as the animal health of the zoonosis. So, like for this instance, we have students that come from both sustainability sciences, as well as those who are majoring in health, as well as those who come from policy governance studies. So because my target audience of that course is undergraduates, I try to keep it as rudimentary as possible so that students coming in from policy or other, like, there are also students that study justice, potentially going to legal studies, so that they don't have that barrier when they hear first time what infectious disease is or what a virus is for the first time. But what I try to focus on is ultimately how they all interact on a systematic level and how they all impact each other, that leads to changes in policy or in interventions due to these cascading effects. And there they see how, even though they come from different starting points, how all their fields are in the end interlinked with like the impact of, let's say, zoonosis with COVID-19. That was a great example that we could illustrate, or how potentially the impact of climate change leads to zoonosis. But then we try to figure out how are all these different elements are adding on or alleviating these cascading effects. So there they get to see a more systematic level of interaction. So this is what I try to strive for, at least when I have to blend, I wouldn't say hard sciences, but more of yeah.
No.
Yeah, so
I get it.
I hope that helps. Yeah.
Yeah. If I may, I have one follow-up question. To what extent are your students who come from different backgrounds able to talk to one another in your class?
Oh, that's a great question. So I intentionally design assignments that they are forced to work together, so that they have to talk to each other to find out certain, I wouldn't say solution oriented, but at least to understand the cause of why certain phenomena happen. So then each of them have to bring in their perspective about trying to explain the situation. So that definitely helps. Yeah. I try to design assignments that way at least. The latest one that they did was on science communication, where the ultimate goal is to communicate complex topics like zoonosis or pandemic or environmental pollution like microplastics, for example, to general audience. But then they need to have an input from, let's say, a legal aspect and policy aspect, and also sustainability science aspect, and also health. So then all these students have to talk to each other about what message is core that they need to deliver to general audience that may not have any type of scientific background at all. So this is where they really try to use their heads to actually try to find like, okay, how do we achieve this? So, and it's really nice to see how these students work together and try to communicate. So.
Can I give one more example? Sorry. There's also an example where a course in it's called Climate Change Politics links up with another class on climate change in the science track. And so these two classes merge, and so they have sessions apart. So they learn their own discipline, like political science and the role of politics and climate change. But then the science students learn more of the science behind climate change, and then they get together to kind of share and discuss and how the science can influence the politics, right? So science communication is important because the more sciencey students will have to explain to the political science parts, but also the political science students will explain to the scientists the political reality of how, there's the science, but then there's how policy and politics work too, right? And so I think this dialogue happens on both ends.
Yeah, I think these are great examples, and I think it's very clever to make students talk with one another and collaborate in groups. That's a very effective strategy. What I would like to point out, perhaps from my perspective, and also what I've seen in Indonesia, is how important it is for lawyers to be able to do this when they get involved in lawmaking, because many see lawmaking very much as a technical exercise where they just get some information and they make the law. But that's not how it works, because it's really hard to actually put these real life problems, which are highly, which are basically explained in terms of biology or medicine or geology, to put that into a legal text and to translate it in that way. And that's something which we find also is a major problem in Indonesia, that there are very few lawmakers who are able to speak with people who are trained in other disciplines. In the Netherlands, it's a bit more developed, but still there it's an issue as well.
I also had a question actually for Minna and Jyoti. It's very interesting, your project. I was just wondering, do you design this program for every discipline, or is it something that, are you targeting specific disciplines, and are you developing strategies in terms of really how to substantively incorporate these issues into the really substance of the class? Because I imagine that, I mean, we have 1,000 constellations in different classes, so each time it comes in a very different way. So how do you grapple with that? How do you keep it general and specific at the same time? I guess that's my question. You see what
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So we struggled with that too. So we also feel like teachers will approach this where they're at, right? Some teachers, like our colleagues, will combine courses, right? But that takes a lot of work to kind of link your course with another course. But we have colleagues that teach more policy and political science that might just want to add a reading or change their assignment, right? And so what we want to do is provide examples, because we've all in this team tried different things, bringing in different assignments, bringing in different readings, or addressing different parts of the spectrum, to share our examples and then have teachers work with their syllabus to see what they're able to change, right? So it might be you don't change anything of the readings, but your assignment focuses on you make the links, have the students make the links to sustainability and climate change, right? And that gives the teacher the freedom to decide where they're at. And we're hoping that the videos will kind of help provide some educational context to understand what the issues are, right? So the videos are going to be about 4 videos that are about 5 minutes each on different topics. So we will have a template and resources and some guidelines, but it is really up to the individual, and we will work with them to kind of figure out where they're at to make those changes.
I just wanted to add on to a very interesting observation in terms of the specific course that we have in Indian law schools. And I think Government Law College for Ramata is an example where they have a 3-year LLB where students who finish their graduate studies, including doctors, police officers, chartered accountants, you name the discipline, would come and join the class. And the discussions are, in fact, one of the examples that we saw in the certificate course was to have a discussion when they have this kind of background and connect it to the idea of, say, climate change laws. So that kind of brings in, just adding on to what Min was also talking about, the extent of diversity of discussion, plus bringing that kind of expertise that can connect the idea of interdisciplinarity. I'm sure Joby ma'am or Diana ma'am would be in a better position to share their experience in this kind of discussion. But this, I thought, was something different now that hearing the discussion, that this 3-year course would actually be a nice space for this kind of discussions.
To a certain extent, that is true, Rhea, because we have doctors, engineers, I think around 20 to 25 students having computer science as their BTech. So they are now studying law. So in such cases, it will be very good in the cases of cyber forensic, all those aspects, wherein the lawyers, the typical lawyers, lack their knowledge in that aspect. And we have one homeo doctor over here. She is doing her LLB, and likewise, there are so many. There's a CA, chartered accountants, as Rhea has pointed out. So we have so many students coming from this different disciplines, and if they are taking this law, then there is what we visualize as a collaborations or interdisciplinary approach. Will be they will be specialized in those areas. So there is a scope for that. Okay. Thank you, everyone. As everyone has raised the concern that law students doesn't like interdisciplinary. To a certain extent, youngsters really doesn't like interdisciplinary. But there are areas, as Rhea has pointed out, we have 3 courses going in degrees, those who have different disciplines coming in. And actually, I would like to congratulate Jyoti and Min, and all the best for your project. For its success, best wishes, and I hope it will be a grand success. All the best to both of you for your project. And Lisa, thank you. Thank you for telling us the challenges you face. And as Rhea has pointed out, it's very